80 plus types of sleep disorders, but not only lists them, but tells you what the diagnostic criteria are, what the typical history is, what the typical findings, what the typical prognosis is. So that's the kind of nosology I'll be introducing you to right now, as a broad overview of the segments of that book and how sleep disorders are classified. So the first section of the book is about insomnia, and there's chronic insomnia disorder, and there are several types or subtypes of chronic insomnia disorder. So one is psychophysiological insomnia, another is inadequate sleep hygiene, and another example would be behavioral insomnia of childhood. These are examples, but they're common examples. So psychophysiological insomnia is the type where someone not only has long ongoing difficulty with insomnia, taking, for example, a half hour or more to fall asleep, or having multiple awakenings or long periods of awakenings during the night, or waking up in early morning hours before they want to get up. But the reason in psychophysiological insomnia usually has to do with concern about sleeping. So concern, or you might say over concern about sleeping, actually promotes the insomnia itself. And this is a very common type of sleep disorder. There's also a condition component to it where there becomes a habit of being awake at certain parts of the night, and once someone is in that habit, it's hard to break it. Inadequate sleep hygiene has to do with behaviors or choices or habits that people make in their daily lifestyle that are not conducive to good sleep and result in sleep problems. So, for example, it might not be the best thing to have a lot of caffeine in the hours leading up to sleep. And that would be an example of inadequate sleep hygiene if the person is suffering the consequences with insomnia. Behavioral insomnia of childhood is extremely common. Many children go through these phases of having that while they're young. There's different subtypes even within that. So, for example, sleep onset association disorder is one type in which a child learns to have a parent by the bedside or by the crib side usually when they're going to sleep, and then if they wake up during the night, they learn to associate the pattern with their sleep or with going to sleep, and they can't go to sleep unless the parent comes back, so they cry until the parent comes back. And that can lead to quite a difficult night, or a series of weeks or months, or sometimes even years of difficult nights for the parent. Fortunately, all these types of insomnia disorders are usually quite treatable. Usually treat them by behavioral and cognitive techniques, often without Another example, more broadly, of insomnia would be short-term insomnia disorder, or adjustment insomnia, and that's a very common form that you probably all experienced at one point or another. Family member dies, other major challenges in life are often accompanied by a temporary period of insomnia. The second large category of sleep disorders is sleep disorder breathing. Within that, there's obstructive sleep apnea that we've talked about a little already. Extremely common, results from obstructive sleep. There's also another type of sleep apnea where there are also pauses in breathing, but it's not from obstruction of the throat. Central sleep apnea, the effort to breathe actually stops for periods. That's because usually the brain is not telling it's not orchestrating the breathing process for those temporary periods. Less common in obstructive sleep apnea, but still can be consequential. Often occurs in the setting of other types of health conditions. And then sleep-related hyperventilation would be another example. The diaphragm is moving, and there are not discrete periods where it stops moving or the throat obstructs. But for one reason or another, the person is not moving air hypoventilating during sleep. Increases in carbon dioxide levels. The next big category is called central disorders of hypersomnolence. There's narcolepsy type 1 and narcolepsy type 2. Narcolepsy type 1 is that usually occurs with cataplexy, or where the person eventually develops cataplexy. Narcolepsy is a disorder where the person is very sleepy. It comes from the brain. Type 1, we know that the cause is a deficiency in the specific neurotransmitter, orexin. Sometimes it occurs near the onset of where it develops cataplexy, which is a sudden loss of muscle emotion or surprise. Narcolepsy type 2, in contrast, has the same pretty much type of daytime sleepiness issue, but it's not so clearly due to a total deficiency of orexin. Does not involve cataplexy. Idiopathic hypersomnia, we assume, is a sleepiness due to the central nervous system. We, in these cases, can't identify what that cause is. It doesn't qualify for narcolepsy of either type. We end up calling it idiopathic hypersomnia. It can often occur with long nocturnal sleep periods. Klein-Levin syndrome is sometimes in the past been called recurrent hypersomnia. And what it is a very severe sleepiness and excessive sleep for periods of days to a couple weeks, typically. And then weeks or months of normal alertness and normal function, only to be broken again by a recurrence of period of sleepiness. Next big section is circadian rhythm disorders. And these are disorders in which the body or the brain clock is not functioning like it is in most people, and usually problems arise because of disjoints between the expected requirement for that brain to be awake and functioning at times when everybody else is, and its ability to do so. So one type is called delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, a very common disorder that affects most commonly teenagers and young adults. And it happens at that age probably because the natural clock is a little bit longer. So whereas most of us have a natural tendency to survive and live on a 24-hour or near 24-hour cycle, at those ages sometimes the clock can be a little bit longer, and if it gets too long, there's a tendency to sleep later in the morning and to go to sleep later at night. And people with delayed sleep-wake phase disorder do fine if they're allowed to go to sleep very late and get up very late. But when they have to get up at a regular time for a morning class or to be at work on time, they can encounter substantial difficulty doing so. Another example would be non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm disorder, where people only have a non-24-hour rhythm. And the consequences from it, jet lag disorder, many of you have experienced across time zones and take a while to adjust. And then finally, shift work disorder. Shift work is relevant, it turns out, to about 10% of our society. People on shifts that are other than the usual 9 to 5, 8 to 5 to 5 kind of working. These arise not so much from having a different consequence sleep period and timing of that sleep period, but consequences arise when that sleep period is constantly changing. People who work shift work often, if not always, have a tendency to shift back on the days that they're not working to a, quote, regular schedule. And that constant shifting turns out to be much faster than the brain can readily adjust to and accommodate. And the result can be serious sleepiness during periods when the person is trying to be awake to function at work or enjoy their lives. Another big category, parasomnias. These are unwanted or unusual, out of the ordinary behaviors that are occurring during sleep. An example would be sleepwalking, sleep terrors, and sleep-related eating disorder. All of these are disorders that occur with partial arousal from non-REM sleep. And, they can be normal. The first two can be normal, part of being a young child. If they persist past young childhood, they can be more concerned. They can also occur in the context of another sleep disorder that is disturbing sleep and partially arousing them and triggering these behaviors. Sleepwalking doesn't necessarily have to be just walking. It can involve other types of behavior without getting out of bed. Sleep terrors are where typically a young child will wake up unconsolable, crying, screaming. Um, that can last for minutes, and then the person will just go back to sleep and have no memory of it typically the next day, but the parents often do because it's such a frightening experience to see a child in such a state of apparent terror. Sleep-related eating disorder occurs when people are actually getting out of bed at night while not completely conscious and eating various foods, often foods that they're trying not to eat during the day, if they're on a diet, for example. And many times they'll have no memory of eating during the night, except that they'll find the evidence of the food packages in odd places, or bowls and spoons in odd positions in the morning. REM sleep behavior disorder is another class of these parasomnias. As you can guess, it occurs during REM sleep. And as opposed to childhood sleepwalking or sleep terrors, typically REM sleep behavior disorder will occur in later life. And in REM sleep behavior disorder, a patient will actually act out his or her dreams. They're often violent dreams too, so the patient may be punching the air or attacking a bureau or furniture, or in very concerning cases, even attacking or defending themselves against a bed partner who is perceived in the dream as attacking them. And interestingly, this type of REM sleep, this type of parasomnia, not always, but very often is a prelude to neurodegenerative disorder, one of the Parkinson's, or Parkinson-related disorder, Parkinsonism, can often develop sometimes many years after the onset of this parasomnia. But the parasomnia can also occur in response to certain medications or other conditions. And another example of a parasomnia would be sleep enuresis or bedwetting. There are sleep-related movement disorders. An example, and perhaps one of the most common, is restless leg syndrome. This is a sensory motor disorder in which someone describes typically just the sensation of needing to move their legs. Sometimes it can affect other parts of the body, the upper extremities, but typically the legs during the night. It's worst in the evening hours. It's worse when the person is still. And the feeling goes away when they move their legs. So many of these patients lie down at night to go to bed. That's the time when it becomes worse, and they can't go to sleep because their legs just have this sensation that they have to move them, and they end up having to get up and walk. And as you can imagine, can interfere with their sleep. Periodic limb movement disorder is a condition where the legs kick intermittently during the night. Every 20, 30, or 40-second intervals, the legs will kick. It could be one leg for a while, and then the other leg, sometimes be both legs. The periodic leg movements often occur in restless leg syndrome. Probably 80% of patients with restless legs have the periodic leg movements. But the periodic leg movements can occur by themselves without the restless leg syndrome. And if they're causing, not commonly, but it can occur, if they're causing insomnia or daytime sleepiness, then we would call it periodic limb movement disorder. Bruxism is extremely common. Few people don't have bruxism or tooth grinding at one point or another during their life, but when it occurs during the sleep period, we call it sleep-related bruxism. It can be increased with stress or other precipitants for it. And then finally, another example is sleep-related rhythmic movement disorders, such as head banging, repetitive head banging, or body rocking that can occur as a person is going to sleep, sometimes even during sleep. And it can occur recurrently through the night. So here I'm going to show you, or give you an opportunity to watch a video that shows an example of parasomnia, and we'll talk about it briefly after you have had a chance to watch it. Okay, so I hope you got to watch that example of a parasomnia. That was sleep groaning, or more officially called catathrenia. Not a lot is known about this parasomnia. We don't think it's terribly common. But it is interesting and sounds rather dramatic, which is why I wanted to show you an example. Typically that groaning or moaning sound happens with these long and prolonged expirations. And Some people have hypothesized that it might relate in some way to obstructive sleep apnea, but we really don't know very much about this parasite. So we'll go to this, which is another video, and this is an example of a sleep-related movement disorder. So in that video, what you were watching was sleep-related bruxism in a child, and what you could see very well was that there was some teeth grinding, and especially you could hear it. And there are some cases that are even quite a bit louder than that, and that can be quite difficult for a bed partner to tolerate during the night. Interestingly, this disorder is not thought to really have bad consequences usually for the person's sleep, but it could have bad consequences for their teeth. So one of the first things that we do is, in that case, we need to make sure that someone has a dentist who can make a protective splint for the person to wear during the night so they're not grinding teeth against teeth. Here's another example of sleep-related movement disorder. For those of you who didn't recognize it, this sleep-related movement disorder was actually periodic limb movements during sleep, or actually here specifically periodic leg movements during sleep. You saw those relatively brief contractions, dorsiflexion of the foot, and that's rather typical. They can be even more pronounced with even more kicking, where the bed partner gets kicked inadvertently. But that's what we're talking about seeing in many patients who also have restless leg syndrome, but also in other patients who don't have restless leg syndrome and aren't complaining about anything with regard to their legs. And occasionally in someone who does have complaints about their sleep, and we think that the leg movements might have something to do with it. And here I will show you another, or you can look at another sleep-related movement disorder. So if you watch that example of a sleep-related movement disorder, what you saw was a child with head banging combined with an element of body rocking. And that kind of movement disorder can typify each night of a patient's sleep. They'll typically start doing that while they're trying to go to sleep, but it can extend into sleep and sometimes occur periodically through the night. Don't generally see that has grave consequences for how refreshing sleep is or for next day function. It can have consequences for the safety of someone's cranium. So in a bad case of head banging, where some patients have been even known to damage the wall or a bedboard, we'll make sure that someone is wearing a helmet while they're sleeping. And next I'm going to ask you to take a look at two examples here of parasomnias. So if you watch those two videos, they both show the same type of disorder, REM sleep behavior disorder. In the first one, you saw an older person lying calmly and sleeping in the bed, and then suddenly things became less calm, and you saw him kind of punching, we don't know what, in his dream. Even it looked like slapping or hitting the bed at one point. And most likely he was dreaming of a fight, and he was defending himself or possibly attacking someone. But usually it's a situation of threat where the person is having an aggressive dream. In the second video, you saw similar behavior in another individual, but you got to see it at the same time that you were watching the polysomnogram signals. And what you saw was at one point the signals became much more active, for example, with the brain waves and the muscle tone. And at the same time, you got to see that the person was starting to do things consistent with what you were seeing in the signals in terms of punching the air and having another one of these episodes of acting out a dream. So at this point, I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about a specific sleep disorder that serves very well as an example of what sleep disorders can do to general health, but also as a prototype for other sleep disorders.